My name is Daniel Ortiz, and I was 28 years old when my uncle made the biggest mistake of his life. It happened at my grandfather's memorial dinner. Marcus stood at the head of the table, raised his glass, and smiled at everyone like he already owned the future. Then he looked directly at me. "Daniel," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "why don't you let the adults handle things from here?" A few people laughed. I didn't. I just smiled, nodded, and took another sip of coffee. Because what Marcus didn't know was that, less than 12 hours earlier, I had signed the final documents that made me the majority owner of the company he'd spent 6 months trying to take from my grandfather's estate. And by tomorrow morning, Marcus was going to find out that the quietest person in the room had been watching him the entire time. Before I tell you how it happened, let me take you back 8 years. I was 20 years old when my grandfather, Eli Ortiz, first taught me that being underestimated could be an advantage. Every Sunday, I drove to his house and spent the afternoon in his workshop. The workshop sat behind the house, separated from the garden by an old wooden fence. It smelled like sawdust, machine oil, and coffee. There was a metal door that groaned every time it opened. I could hear that sound from anywhere on the property. Grandpa built furniture by hand. Not cheap furniture, real furniture. Heavy tables, cabinets, chairs that could survive decades. He used to run his palm across a finished piece, as if he were saying goodbye to something he had raised himself. I wasn't much of a talker back then. At family dinners, Marcus talked about business. Rita talked about houses. My cousins talked about themselves. I mostly listened. Grandpa noticed. One afternoon, while he was sanding the leg of a chair, he looked at me and said, "You watch people, Daniel." I looked up. "Is that bad?" He smiled. "No, most people talk because they're afraid of silence." He set the sandpaper down. "You're not afraid of it." Then he said something I didn't understand at the time. "Silence isn't weakness. It's where you keep your strength until you need it." I remembered those words for the rest of my life, because my family had already decided what I was: quiet, young, unimportant, the nephew who didn't know anything about business. They were wrong. They just didn't know it yet. My father died when I was 12. After that, my mother leaned heavily on her older brother, Marcus. Marcus always called himself the person who kept the family together. What he really meant was that he liked being the person who controlled anything involving money. I noticed it early. He never asked Grandpa how he was doing without first asking about the company. He never looked at Grandpa's furniture without asking what it was worth. And whenever Rita visited the house, she somehow found a reason to talk about the property. I never confronted them. I simply watched. Then Grandpa got sick. It happened slowly. One week he was tired. Then he stopped working as long as he used to. Then the workshop started collecting dust. And suddenly Marcus became the most concerned son in the world. He visited constantly. He brought expensive fruit baskets. He started talking about lawyers. He started saying things like, "We need to make sure everything is organized." But one evening, while I was sitting outside Grandpa's bedroom, I heard something that changed everything. Marcus was on the phone. His voice was low. "The workshop alone is worth more than they realize," he said. I froze. "We liquidate it quickly after he dies. No reason to let sentiment get in the way." There was a pause. Then Marcus laughed. "Family businesses aren't museums." I didn't move. I didn't confront him. I just listened, and I remembered every word. Grandpa died on a Tuesday morning in March. The funeral was quiet. Marcus wore a suit that probably cost more than Grandpa's favorite workbench. Rita cried harder than anyone. She hadn't visited the workshop in 11 years. That night, I went home and stared at the small metal box Grandpa had given me 2 years earlier. He had told me, "Don't open it until you need to." I hadn't understood what that meant. Now I did. Inside was a folded letter and a business card. Harold Weiss, attorney. My hands shook as I opened the letter. There were only 3 lines. "Daniel, you already know how to be quiet. Now learn how to be ready. Call Harold." "Grandpa," I called him the next morning. Harold's office smelled like old books and coffee. He didn't waste time. He placed a thick folder on the desk between us. "Your grandfather anticipated what Marcus would do." I stared at him. "What did he do?" Harold opened the folder. 2 years ago, your grandfather restructured the company." He pushed a document toward me. 51% of the company was transferred into a trust. I looked at the name on the paperwork. Mine. Daniel Ortiz. I couldn't speak. Harold continued. Your uncle believes he is going to inherit control of the company. He isn't? Harold shook his head. Marcus owns a minority share. And me? You control 51%. I leaned back. For the first time since Grandpa died, I understood why he had always told me to be patient. He hadn't been preparing me to inherit his company. He had been preparing me to protect it. But there was more. Harold showed me copies of emails and business documents Marcus had been preparing. Marcus had already contacted a buyer. He planned to sell the workshop property for $240,000. He had even set a closing date, the 15th. Harold looked at me. You can stop the sale. Then why haven't we? Because if we move too early, Marcus can claim confusion or misunderstanding. He tapped one of the documents. But if he signs the buyer's agreement himself, knowing exactly what he's doing, his intent becomes impossible to deny. I understood. Grandpa had taught me patience. Harold was teaching me timing. So we waited, and Marcus kept digging. A week before the deadline, he invited me to lunch. Marcus had never invited me anywhere alone before. He ordered my favorite meal. He smiled. He asked about college. Then he slid an envelope across the table. $5,000. Just to help you get started, he said. I looked at the envelope. What am I signing? Marcus laughed. Nothing complicated. That was when I knew. He wasn't helping me. He was buying my silence. I pushed the envelope back. I'll think about it. His smile disappeared for half a second. Then it returned. Of course. I walked out. That evening, my 16-year-old cousin Mia found me sitting outside. She was one of the only people in the family who actually paid attention. Something's wrong, she said. What makes you think that? Everyone keeps talking about Grandpa's company when you're not in the room. I smiled. Don't worry about it. She studied me. You know something, don't you? I didn't answer. She didn't ask again. That night, I drove to the workshop. The house was empty. The garden was dark. I unlocked the old metal door. It groaned exactly the way it always had. Inside, Grandpa's tools were still hanging on the wall. His workbench was still there. His coffee mug was still sitting beside the window. I sat on the old steps where we'd spent hundreds of Sundays together, and for the first time, I let myself cry. Not because I was afraid, because I finally understood what Grandpa had done. He hadn't trusted me because I was the strongest person in the family. He trusted me because I was the only one who understood that some things aren't measured by money. The workshop wasn't just property, it was his life, and Marcus was about to sell it like scrap metal. I wiped my eyes. Then I called Harold. I'm ready. The night before the deadline, I sat alone in my apartment. 11:50 p.m. My phone was beside it. At midnight, Harold called. Marcus signed the buyer's agreement 2 hours ago. I closed my eyes. Are you sure? Absolutely. A pause. Then Harold asked, ready to finish this? I looked at Grandpa's old coffee mug sitting on my desk. Yes. At 12:03 a.m., I signed the final trust activation documents. My name appeared on the screen. Daniel Ortiz, majority shareholder, 51%. For several seconds, I just stared at it. Then Harold said quietly, your grandfather would be proud. I looked around the silent apartment. For years, silence had made me feel invisible. That night, it felt like power. Across town, Marcus was sleeping peacefully. He thought he had already won. He had no idea that his biggest mistake had already been signed. The next evening, the family gathered for Grandpa's memorial anniversary. Marcus stood up after dinner. He tapped his glass. Everyone turned toward him. He gave a little speech about family, about responsibility, about making mature decisions. Then he looked at me. Daniel, he said, why don't you let the adults handle things from here? There was a little laughter around the table. I smiled. Sure. Marcus relaxed. Then he said, about the workshop sale, I need your signature. I looked at him. I already signed. His eyebrows lifted. Good. He smiled. Then I finished my coffee. Just not the document you think. His smile disappeared. 30 seconds later, his phone rang. He answered. Hello. I watched the color leave his face. Harold was on the other end, explaining, calmly, professionally. The sale was blocked. The majority shareholder had rejected it, and the majority shareholder wasn't Marcus. It was me. Marcus slowly lowered the phone. He stared at me. What did you do? I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, Grandpa protected the company before you ever tried to take it. Marcus looked around the table. For once, nobody laughed with him. Rita grabbed her phone. Her voice exploded through the room. "You told me the company was yours." Marcus tried to interrupt. She kept shouting, and suddenly, the man who had spent years telling everyone else to speak up had nothing to say. "I didn't celebrate. I didn't insult him. I didn't tell him I had warned him. I simply picked up my coffee. Because Grandpa had taught me something much more valuable than business. He taught me that you don't need to prove yourself to people who have already decided not to see you. You just need to be ready when the moment comes." Marcus eventually lost control of the company. His reputation went with it. Rita moved out of state a year later, still angry at everyone except herself. Harold retired 2 years after that. Before he left, he gave me one final piece of advice. "Your grandfather didn't leave you a company, Daniel." I looked at him. "What did he leave me?" Harold smiled. "A responsibility. Today, I still have the workshop. I repaired the old metal door. It doesn't groan anymore. But sometimes, on Sunday mornings, I find myself wishing it did. I sit on Grandpa's old steps with a chipped coffee mug in my hands, and I think about the boy I used to be, the quiet one, the invisible one, the one everyone assumed didn't understand what was happening around him. They were right about one thing. I was quiet. They were wrong about what that meant, because sometimes the person saying the least is the person who has noticed the most, and sometimes the people who underestimate you are simply giving you the space you need to become impossible to stop." Grandpa was right. Silence isn't weakness. It's where you keep your strength until you need it. And when that moment comes, you won't need to say much. Your actions will speak for you. If you've ever been underestimated by someone you trusted, tell me your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe. There are more stories coming.